Okay, so let's start. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining on this webinar, which is in fact an extended demo on how we can make a data vault in Databricks. My name is Enrique Pascual. I'm a solutions architect from Wordscape. And we will see during the demo how we can use the Wordscape products to build a data vault, in this case in Databricks. If you're familiar with Wordscape products, you might already know that, let's say that the interface or how the user uses the products doesn't change with different targets. But today we will be using Databricks, which is a particular target in the sense that we will be creating a data lake and with Delta files. Okay, what you see in the screen is Wordscape Red. Wordscape Red is our builder tool, which means it is the tool where we will create all the physical tables and where we will do all the day-to-day operations. Think about things like creating a table, loading a table, scheduling jobs, maybe changing data types, adding columns. All the day-to-day operations will be done on this interface that you're seeing on the screen, which is Wordscape Red. And our other product is Wordscape 3D, which is our modeling tool. This means that when we have to create a new model, in this case, a data vault, but it could be something like a 3NF or maybe a star schema, we can do this with Wordscape 3D. Okay. It also means that there is no physical tables created within Wordscape 3D, only models. You can think of 3D as a metadata engine that allows you to gather metadata from your sources and transform that metadata into models. Okay, so if we go back to the overview, what our two products do are bringing your data sources from your source. May this be something like an ODBC, a JDBC, maybe there are flat files, maybe it's an API, okay, to your reporting layer, which is usually or almost always a star schema. In between, you can create something like a data vault, or as I said before, it could be something like a 3NF, or maybe a data lake, or maybe even directly a star schema. That is your choice, as it is your choice as well to use Databricks, or maybe Fabric, or maybe SQL Server, Oracle. Let's say any of the, I'm going to say, well-known databases and cloud providers are supported by our products. Both our products work with metadata as the base, or as I'm going to say, the secret recipe. We will see how we can create the documentation as well, automatically based on the metadata. And Wordscape Red comes with a scheduler, which is an Azkaban scheduler, which is a scheduler created by LinkedIn. And you will see a little bit of how those things would actually work. We will try to cover as much as possible. And you can add any questions you may have to the chat, and we will try to go over them at the end of the short demo that we will do first. Okay, so to start, I'm going to go back to 3D. And what I'm going to do is to define a connection first. A connection can be anything that has an ODBC, a JDBC, maybe it has an API, maybe it's something like files on ADLS or S3. It doesn't really make a difference. As long as we can define it within 3D as a connection, meaning as long as we can script it or simply add it if it's something simpler, like, as I said before, an ODBC or a JDBC connection, we can define a connection. Today, I will use Northwind, simply because it's simple as a sample connection. Okay. In this case, it is Northwind in Azure, which you may already know that is a sample database from Microsoft. Okay, the next step would be click on Discover Connection. I'm going to go to my Northwind category. I'm going to give it a version number. which is going to be today's date. And then I can choose between the different schemas. And then I can set things like filters. For example, on table types, I may not be interested on system tables or views. And then I can set things like filters based on names to include or exclude tables. I'm going to leave everything else as default. And I'm going to run what we call the discovery method. This discovery method is a series of SQL queries that run over the system tables to pick up the structure of my source. So think about my table names, attribute types, relationships. And then on this next wizard, I have my profiling, which I'm going to run as well, but I'm going to hide it. Okay. Based on that discovery method that I was explaining, we can see that 3D has uncovered my source. Okay, again, my table names, attribute types, something is a primary key or a foreign key, if it's this blue small key as well. Here you can see my relationships on these arrows. If they are not present, or if I have things like files which do not have things like primary keys and foreign keys, I can always create my own, or I can derive my relationships with this wizard. This wizard will try to make guesses over what is a primary key and a foreign key. If I want to keep track of my sources, I can also compare my models with this wizard, and I can choose. I'm going to choose the one that says modified. And this will basically compare my current source with an older version, in this case of the same source, and it will point out which tables and which attributes have been modified for me. I can also schedule this every week or every month, so I will get a report on how my sources have actually changed. Lastly, on this source section, I can try to show you the profiling on my result. Let me see if I can see it on a graph. Now, based on my profiling, again, my profiling are a series of queries that are run against my source. Okay, both the discovery method and the profiling queries are open to the user. You can actually see them on the interface. You can modify them, and you will always know which queries you are running against your sources. And in this, I can see, for example, that 2/3 of my region is empty as a profiling metric, as an example of which, and my fax is 1/4 empty. So I can probably use this already to spot data quality issues before they actually reach to my reporting layer or even to my integration layer. Now, based on the source that I have just discovered, if I want to create something like a data vault, I would go to my next category, which is a data vault design. And I will create a new version. Again, I'm going to give it today's date. And now what I have on my screen is an empty canvas. Okay. If you have done the data vault training, during the training, they explain that you have to know your sources very well and that you have to flag your sources. They propose to do it on an Excel file. We do that same exercise, but we do it within 3D. So I'm going to choose one of my tables. For example, customers. I'm going to drag and drop it into my middle pane again. And this being my source table, I am going to flag each of these attributes depending on where I want those attributes to end up into. So for example, my customer ID will be my business key. So I would expect to have a hub out of my business key for a data vault. And then I am just going to choose 3 of these attributes to make a satellite maybe low volatility. And the rest of my attributes, I will set them to a satellite. I'm going to say medium volatility. Now, once I click on apply and OK, you can see that these flags have set these colors on my attributes on my right-hand side. Based on the metadata that I have gathered from my source and on the flags that I have added to my model, 3D can already generate a data vault. I'm going to click on this wizard. Again, I'm going to give it today's date to have a version number. And now, based on a series of rules we call model conversion rules, 3D will actually generate my data vault. Okay, these are the rules that I will use. And the rest I'm going to leave them as defaults. Okay. Here we can see all the rules that I have applied. If I would have any sort of error or mistake, I could click on this link and go over each of the operations of the rule. I click on finish, and now we can see that the rules have created a hub and 2 satellites. On my hub, the rules have added my business key, my hash key hub customers, which is the hash that I need inside my hub, and 3 technical columns that complete the data vault hub. In the case of a satellite, it has added my hash key as my foreign key, my attributes that were flagged, in this case as a medium rate of change, or that medium volatility satellite, and the technical columns that will help us, in this case, keep history, because a satellite we know will keep history, and basically to have a satellite that will be 2.0 compliant. By default, the rules will generate a data vault that is 2.0 compliant, which is the standard that we use for data vault, but you can always modify the rules to generate a slightly different take or flavor of data vault. Okay. The next step would be to generate my load and stage tables. And that would be done, again, based on the model that you are currently seeing here. I'm not going to do that here because in the interest of time, just for the sake of it. But let's say that the next step would give you, let me show you how that would look. Both the data vault and the load and the stage tables. The load tables are 1-to-1 copies of our source, simply as a landing area, and the stage tables will be used to basically calculate the hashes. Okay, hashing can be an expensive operation, and that's why we have by default those 2 layers separated. For the rest of the demo, we will reference, I'm going to say, a slightly more complete data vault model, but you can see it is based on the same source, and you can actually see our hub customer and our 2 satellites. This is a very simple model. It only has hubs, links, and satellites. But of course, you can also generate things like a business vault, which has things like bits, bridges, views, and all those other, I'm going to say, a little bit more complex entities. Okay. But we will simply stick to the raw vault as of for this demo. If you have questions about the business vault, of course, you can ask them as well. Up to this point, we have not told 3D which will be our target. This is because 3D in itself is target agnostic. Only on the last step, we will tell 3D that we will land our data, in this case on a red export category, into Databricks. When we do so, 3D will apply something we call data type mappings, which will basically change the data types into my target, and they will also add any transformations that are needed, in this case from our SQL Server source into our Databricks target. Okay. After that, we will click on export to red, and all that metadata will be exported into an XML document that will only contain, let's say, the model we have just been designing and discussing during the demo. Okay, this will be the input for red. I'm not going to do this process. I'm just going to skip directly into red and show you how that would look inside our builder. So that same model that we're actually looking at had load tables, stage tables, hubs, links, and satellites. Okay. Now, based on the metadata that we have inserted into red, and based on a series of templates that, of course, we will provide to you, you can generate the code that will work for, in this case, for Databricks. I'm going to show you an example of each. So, for example, for a load table, this would be the generated code. This code has been generated based on the template. It is Python code that will make an extraction and will load the data into Databricks. This is based on the metadata. You don't have to actually code anything, but you will always see the code that you are running. And you can also modify both the code here on this interface, or you can also modify the templates themselves. For the stage, we would have a different template, but the idea would be the same. Again, we would have Python code with SQL embedded in it. Here you can see the statements. And also for our hubs, our links, and our satellites. If we want to create a job, we can create a job with this wizard. And this will make a job with all my dependencies on our Azkaban scheduler. The scheduler can be controlled with the scheduler tab or with the scheduler web client, which is what you're seeing on the screen now. Okay, this all comes shipped with the product. So you can install it with the product itself, or you can install it on a different machine, another Windows machine, another Linux machine, maybe on a Docker container. That's a little bit up to you. Now, if I go back to red and I go back to the builder, all the day-to-day operations that you would expect to do on your warehouse, things like displaying your data. Let me see if this one is populated. Or changing things like data types. Here you can see all your data. If I want to change things like column names, data types, any of those things, maybe my sources, all the day-to-day operations can be done from within the interface itself. Okay, for all the entities you may need, again, until your business layer. So for example, now maybe I would like to make my presentation layer, and that could be something like a fact table and my dimension tables on top, in this case of my data vault. So I'm not sure if this one is populated. Let's see if this one is populated as well. So this will be my fact table, which will basically have my joins based on my hashes, because we know that the references are made from my hashes. In the case of Databricks, once I run something like a load table, this is the output that I will see on my results pane, which is this box that we have on my lower side of the screen. This will run the script interactively, and it will push all the output on this window. Here you can see all the operations that have been done, all the SQL, in this case it is Spark SQL, run through an ODBC on my target. And now if we go back into, let me see if I can find which table is this. I think this was load categories, load customers, I believe. So here you can see that the timestamp, I just run this a little bit before the demo, actually just when we were starting the demo, because the server is 1 hour ahead from my machine. And now if we go back into Databricks, we can actually see how that has translated into my catalog. In this case, I am using a Unity catalog, which is the latest catalog. If you know Databricks, you might have worked with the Hive Metastore, that is the original or the older version. Now I have done it on the newer version and on a catalog that is called Demo. Let me see if I can find this now, my catalog, sorry. And now you can see on my demo, I think it was load. And we were looking at load customers. And now if we will look at the data, we should see on our, I'm not sure if I can actually see the last column. Here you can see that the timestamp is that same timestamp that we're seeing on the load that we have just performed at the beginning of the demo. Here you can see how all these tables have translated the data from the interface into Databricks. This has been done via ODBC, and we usually get the question, how if we want to do this on a different way, for example, making notebooks, okay? To do that, we actually have a new template or a different template that will generate a different code. I have already run this code before. If we look at this table itself, we can see that we have a different template, and this template will generate a different Python code, and this Python code will actually generate a notebook for us, okay? The notebook is also based on SQL, but because I want to create a Delta Live table as an example, we do need notebooks for them, okay? In that case, the output is what you're seeing below, and you can see that I am creating a streaming table for my Delta Live table, and at the end, I am actually creating a pipeline. That pipeline and that notebook is translated into my workspace. In this case, I have made it on a folder that has a schema folder, and then my notebook that has the name of my table. This is a convention. Of course, you can change that convention. And here you can see the notebook that I have created without having to code anything. And I have uploaded into my workspace. Here you can see the comment section, and you can see that I have generated this today. Again, well, I generated this maybe 10 minutes before we started. Okay, and then we can see things like a red version and my table name and so on. And then below, all the code that I need to run. In this case, my Delta Live table. All this code has been generated by Red and uploaded into my workspace. If we go back to see our Delta Live table itself, our pipeline, here we can see our pipeline, which is running. And the fact that it's green means that it's running correctly as of now, but all this output has been generated by Wordscape Red itself. And actually, I would like to show you how this same query, these same settings, this same JSON is the same JSON that has been generated by the template and uploaded, and it is the same JSON that you're seeing on my results pane. So this is a little bit of how we integrate with the particular points on Databricks. Usually at the end of this demo, we usually show how we create the documentation. And I believe I already have it open. Okay, this is an example of how we generate the documentation. The documentation is generated based on a wizard, so you don't have to write or do anything else. All this will be scrapped from the metadata and it will be added to this website. For example, if I want to see my fact order details, you can see things like my attribute names, attribute types, any scripts, any lineage as well. And of course, if we go back to our data vault, maybe to one of our hubs, our hub customer. Here you can see again all the information that is stored in the metadata is scraped and added to the website, including things like the host scripts or any other related tables as well. There is also a little bit of a watered down version, which is like the business version of the documentation that includes a little bit less of the technical side. But we usually show the technical side that it has a little bit more substance, let's say. Roughly, this is what I wanted to show you. And now, if you have questions about any other details or you would like to see any particular case, please feel free to add it to the chat and I will try to answer as best as I can. So I'm going to go backwards, and the first one says, how do you proceed perform transformation calculations joins before loading your calculated business satellite or information marked? Okay, so I have several options to actually add transformations. One is add them in 3D. In 3D, I can use the model conversion rules that we were discussing before to add a transformation. Let me see if I have something I can show you. For example, add a transformation. And here I can just find the transformations, add a data transformation. This wizard will allow me to add transformations based on rules. A good example is if I have things like dates, I may want to normalize all the dates of a certain source. Then I can use this wizard to match, let's say, certain attribute properties and add many transformations at once. If I think that the transformations are only going to be used once, then I can do this directly inside Red. Okay, I can do them in my fact table level, for example. Actually, I think I have one here. I have a very simple one here on my transformation window. And this will be added to the code. That code may be, in this case, the creation of a view, or it can be something like the DML code we were discussing before. If I want to do that on a satellite, the operation is the same. I could go into one of my satellites. These are not transformation satellites, but if I wanted to add a transformation, I could add it here on my transformation window. And I have my function set, and this interface will help me to do things, I'm going to say, a little bit faster. So I can click on add date and then add my column, and this will help me to add my transformations faster. Next question. Will 3D create the delta load scripts? 3D, no. 3D will actually generate the model, and Red will actually generate those load scripts. In this case, it was a notebook. If I click on generate again, and now I show you this code that will load all that load table into my, in this case, into my notebook or into my Delta Live table. All this will be generated within Red. 3D will only generate the model. If we have to resync a source, maybe due to a change on a table DDL, do we need to import the source? or is there any other way? If you need to resync a source to a change in the table of the DDL, if I make changes on the DDL here, I would simply right click. I'm going to do this on one of my ODS tables. I could simply right click here and click on create, recreate. Any change that I make here, I click on create, recreate, and that will run the DDL over my target. If something changes, let's say, because of other reasons, I can always validate the metadata against my target, and where Scalable Red will actually point out the differences, and it will ask me if I want to change the metadata, if I want to update what I'm seeing on the screen, or if I want to issue an alter statement, simply to sync what I see on my GUI and what I have on my target. It's very important to have those two things synced. So that's a process you can do within the GUI itself. And now here below, you can see how I have run that DDL. Now I'm going to go backwards because I'm not sure if there's any other.
So, Amandika, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah,
Can you see that?
Can I find it?
Okay, can you see it? If you can, I can read the questions off to you, but I thought maybe if you could see the questions, some of them are quite the same. So I don't know if you'd want to.
Where is this?
So you might not be able to see it.
I see it now. I see it now.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Okay, let's start with Ricardo. Shouldn't you prefer flat and white tables instead of a star schema for the end user layer, as Databricks stores data in Parquet files which are column based? Just wondering in regard of performance. So everything that you're seeing on the screen are tables, which by default are Delta Live tables. Okay, Delta Live tables by default, as you are saying, are Parquet files. The fact that I made a star schema is because I focused it to a reporting layer, but you do not have to have a star schema at all. No, you could have a very big fat table, and that would also work, especially on Databricks where performance will not be an issue. But you will need some sort of integration layer. So you will still need something like a Data Vault or maybe a 3NF. Maybe something like an ODS. You will need something in between, but it is up to you if you want to have a star schema or a Data Vault or something else. Maybe just white tables with integration. That is actually the choice of the user. I just had a star schema because of the demo. Yeah. I'm not sure how. Yeah, I'm going to click on that. How do you create a PIT bridge tables in the business vault? Do you need special model conversion rules to create a PIT and bridge tables? Yes, exactly. So actually, I have my PIT and my bridge examples here. You can create them in red or you can create them in 3D. We have a wizard here that I didn't show during the demo, which will basically create a PIT table and a bridge table. So if you click on PIT, you open this wizard and you choose the options. They have to make sense. Huh? Then you ask the ghost record and so on, and that will generate the PIT and the bridge. Actually, I have a new one here. The PIT is the pointing time, and the bridge is to join several tables. These are performance tables, which are materialized to make that, let's say, if you make many joins afterwards, it is interesting on a platform like Databricks, where you will have a lot of joins eventually, and especially if you do something like a Data Vault. That's why these tables do exist. But of course, you can generate them here, and the templates will generate the appropriate code. I'm going to try to show you one. I'm not sure if it's populated or if it's working. Should be. Yeah, here it is. And here you can see I have my hashes as my business keys. In this case, a series of attributes that I added on my bridge, and a snapshot date. Okay, on my PIT, I have my hashes and my start and my end date and so on, because it is a point in time table. And then I also have a series of views as part of my business vault which are current views and history views on top of my satellites as well. Yeah, this was the next question, which is, which other tables do we have on my business vault? I only have these, which are satellite views, but you can have other things. It's a little bit up to you. You can make any other sort of, I don't know, a particular satellite, I don't know, tracking record satellite or things like that. You can make all those kind of, I'm going to say, more exotic entities. They can be also done with both 3D and red. In the greenfield data warehouse projects are kind of simple. Please tell more about how do we incorporate in Wordscape changes to the source system, such as new orders coming from a new system, serving different sets of columns, sometimes the same, but other data types. Yes, that's completely correct. I have made a new data vault. It's always easier to do things new. If there's changes on the data vault, what I would do is I would keep track of my source with that wizard that I showed you at the beginning. And when I know that there is a new table or a new attribute, I would model that new table. The standard says that you should always add new tables, meaning I would have, for example, a new satellite or a new hub. Okay, then I would merge that model with my existing model, meaning I would go maybe here and there is a merge model here. This will allow me to merge both my models. So that way I can keep, let's say, my models in sync. And then I would deploy those new tables into my red repository. And then I would make new joins further down the lineage. That's how the Data Vault 2.0 standard is supposed to work. And that's how both tools work to add new tables. The idea is that there is no downtime if you do not alter tables. That's one of the core concepts of Data Vault. Besides that, if you want to add an existing table to your red repository, we have something we call a retro object, which is here, which will basically pick up the metadata of an existing table and add that metadata so that table can be managed by the GUI or by the red tool without having to recreate or to, let's say, have a greenfield situation. The next question says, is it right that in the business vault you create the objects, which uses objects of the raw vault in combination with pit and bridge tables, which will be the source of the dim and fact tables of the data mart? What is the object type in the business vault table or view, which creates the data for the dim or fact tables on the data mart? So if I go back to my general diagram, if you do a data vault, you will always have the raw vault, because the raw vault is your de facto integration layer. That's completely necessary. And then you can choose how much of the business vault you can make. You can have a business vault with things like views on top of my satellites, on top of my history tables, for example. And then I can have some of those performance tables if I need them. I may not need those performance tables, like pit and bridges may or may not be necessary. And then I could point my BI tools directly to my business vault, or I can point them most likely to a star schema. So it is quite common to have a star schema pointing to a business vault. And that is the reason why you can have, let's say, the kind of lineage that I showed you, but you could also have a star schema pointing directly to your raw vault. Both combinations are possible. The next question says, is the business vault the place where you add the soft business rules of the dim and fact tables? Yes, correct. Let's say that the raw vault, what you're seeing here called as data vault, is the raw vault. This is just a representation of my source. It is my source that I have changed around with 3D, but it is my source as is. Once I go into my Business Vault, then I can add, for example, transformations on my views, or I can add things like any other soft rules that I would add to or before my fact tables. I could also add those on my fact tables as well to have a calculation. Maybe I want to have something like a calculation satellite. All those things have to be added after the raw vault. The raw vault should not have transformations as business rules. The next question says from Claude, how does Wordscape support the medallion architecture of Databricks? Well, the medallion architecture is not something that is kind of written in stone, and we actually have like an infographic, which is a diagram like this, which basically shows that the medallion architecture, with what I have shown you on this demo, would be my bronze layer would be my loading area. Okay. Maybe my staging and my data vault or my raw vault would be my silver layer, and my gold layer or my reporting layer would be my star schema and my business vault. If I had chosen to do a 3NF, I would have probably a load and a stage as a bronze layer. Then I would have my silver layer as a 3NF, and then I would have my gold layer as a star schema, possibly. So it is a little bit up to you how you want to decide how those layers work. Basically, the bronze layer means a landing layer. The silver layer means an integration layer that could or that may or may not have transformations. And the gold layer means a reporting layer. Those are what those three medallions mean. And it's up to you how you want to integrate them within Databricks and within the tool. The next one says, does Wordscape 3D support the medallion architecture? Yeah, that's what we have just discussed. Maybe the medallion architecture is not a very strictly technical term. It's more of I'm gonna say an abstract idea. It's, let's say, how you call your layers, but it's basically what I said before. You can decide where you want your bronze, silver, and gold layers and how you want to model them. The next one says from Douglas, if you are using Databricks autoloader, it can do schema evolution. How does Wordscape deal with the evolution of an incoming schema? So yes, I was using the autoloader when we talked about how we could create those pipelines based on that notebook. Possibly it should be loaded by now. Let's check if it has loaded. It's a little bit slower when you actually create it. So let's check if it has loaded. Was it this one? I'm really not sure if this is going to be working. Okay, so it has loaded. So this has been loaded based on that pipeline with the autoloader. The schema evolution will be handled, let's say, by one of the steps of the notebook. But let's say that when I actually land it, I'm landing it on, I'm going to say, a properly defined table. So if the schema changes, I will have to check or validate how my table compares with my target, for example. The schema evolution is a great idea, but once the schema changes, it will only propagate through the lineage until a certain point, because there will be a certain point where your lineage is expecting a certain number of columns. So it will still land it, but it will kind of break it at a certain point. However, if I define things with delta life tables, generally speaking, even if the schema changes upstream, I will still land that event-driven ingestion onto the last levels of my lineage. For a pit, what if we need to take functional date from the source to include source? Is it possible, or is it only with technical dates? Yes, you can choose which attributes you want to use once you define it on the wizard. And you can always change how the PIT table is actually created. So you may have to change that small wizard that I showed you before, but yes, you can create the PIT table with any combination that you would like. And for now, the last question says, does WordScape support delta tables of Databricks? So by default, any table that you create will be a delta table by default. So all the tables that you're seeing here are delta tables. If I want to create a table with, I'm going to say, I don't know, maybe a Parquet file or something, I'm going to say slightly different. As long as Databricks supports it, I can actually change one of my extended properties and change my table type. Actually, I had a maybe to something like a Parquet, or if I want to do something like a temporary table, I can always add that metadata here. In this case, I added the live one, but it could be on any other target. So if you want to create a different, maybe an iceberg table or something like that, you can always add it on extended property, and the DDL will actually change to reflect that. I'm going to see a different option. Can delta tables also be used for Data Vault? So yes, all the tables that you're seeing here are delta tables. These are the same tables that I was showing you on my catalog. So all these tables, for example, the one that we actually loaded in the wizard, I think was customers. This is a delta table as well. By default, they are delta tables, but they could also be delta live tables, streaming tables. They can be any of the tables that are supported by Databricks. Today's webinar is about just Data Vault. The next webinar is about data live tables and about notebooks and about event-driven ingestion. And not only about the Data Vault. They're just Data Vault tables loaded by pipelines. And basically what we will do on the next demo is add files to this source and then see how those files are loaded into our Data Vault based on the pipelines, which are, in this case, it's continuously running. Let me see if we have any other questions on the chat. How do you organize development of data domains? Do you put in different models? Does WordScape require a database? Yes. So what you're seeing for both WordScape Red and WordScape 3D, both tools work with a repository. The repository stores only the metadata, so things like my column names, my attribute types, and all these things are stored on the repository. And the repository is a Postgres database that can be hosted locally. I have it locally on this VM, but it can also be hosted on things like a PaaS, or maybe in Azure, maybe in AWS, maybe on-prem. This can be hosted wherever you want, and it's completely fine. It's a very small repository, and it will only contain the metadata that you see on the screen. So it will not contain any of the actual data. Can it work with serverless Parquet? Yes, so when you are seeing the ones that are running on data live tables are actually running on a serverless target. When I run the pipeline, it was automatically run or attached to my pipelines, which are serverless, if you define them so. I could have also defined it as a standalone pipeline that then I would have to run. So in this example, it's a continuously running pipeline, but that's up to you how you want to how you want to arrange that. I think that's it on the chat, but there is another one that says on the metadata for 3D integrated with Azure Purview. How does this work? So yes, we have an option inside 3D that allows you to bring models from Purview. Okay, I think I have an example somewhere. Possibly on this other model. I think. Purview. Actually, shouldn't have one here as well. Yeah. So this model has been imported from Purview. And the way to do this, if I remember correctly, is import from Purview. And I'm not sure if this is set up correctly on this. I don't have my credentials valid anymore. But this will basically bring the metadata from models in Purview, and you can actually see that it is the same source, but it was brought in from Purview. The advantage of bringing information or metadata from a data catalog like Purview is that you can use things like business tags or other information that other users or other sources have added into your data catalog can be used to generate models. Think about flagging things on GDPR, maybe information you want to have masked, information you want to share with a certain team or through a certain API. All those things can be useful in the sense that the more metadata we have, the more I'm going to say tips and tricks we can do with the tool to actually help us generate models. Can you also export 3D models to Azure Purview? I think so as well. I don't have an example of that, but both tools can actually export the metadata to third-party tools, also to things like a data catalog and so on, because the repositories are not kind of encrypted in the sense the repository is open to the user. So you can actually relatively easily add third-party tools if you want to, based on how the metadata is arranged. And another question says, which data dictionaries does Wordscape support? Well, Wordscape will actually create your own data dictionary on the let me see, on the documentation itself. We have like a glossary at the end that can actually help you use this. Let me see if I can find it here. But you can always use the metadata, as I was describing it before, to push all your metadata into a third-party tool or into a data catalog. I can, for example, use Purview to discover 3D, just as I was using 3D to discover Purview. It can work sort of both ways. I think this website of mine is frozen now, or I'm maybe not clicking on the right spot. Yeah. So here I have all my object names and so on, my properties, my transformations. Everything is properly documented here. But if I want to push this to a third-party tool, I can use the metadata to actually do that as well. Okay, I'm not sure if we have any other questions or we're just right on time. But if you have any other questions, you can always send us an email or ask about a particular case or see, I don't know, a particular demo or any use case you want to see. I'm sure Courtney will leave, I don't know, an email or something where you can write to us and ask us questions. Thank you for joining, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you everyone for asking questions and being engaging. If you have any questions, please just email us at marketing@wordscape.com or just submit a demo request on our website. I can drop the link in the chat. We will be posting the recording here within 24 hours. And yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you, Andika.
Thanks, Courtney. Have a
Thank
nice afternoon.
you. Bye-bye.